The transport pod hissed as it sealed itself against the docking ring of Megalith 7. Jinho watched the status lights blink from red to amber to a final, solid green. A soft chime sounded. They had arrived. He glanced at his wife, Sumi. She was staring straight ahead, her hands clenched tight in her lap. Her knuckles were white. He knew that look. It was the look she wore every time they had to start over. It was a mix of determination and deep, quiet fear. "We're here," he said, his voice soft. He placed his hand over hers. She unclenched her fingers and laced them with his, offering a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The door slid open onto a wall of sound and smell. The air was thick, warm, and carried 100 different scents. There was the sharp tang of ozone and metal, the damp earth smell of something fungal, a sweet, almost rotting fruit odor, and underneath it all, the sterile, recycled smell common to all space stations. The noise was a constant low roar, the hum of machinery, the distant thrum of engines, and the layered chatter of countless different languages. They gathered their 2 small suitcases, containing everything that mattered to them, and stepped out into the main arrival corridor of Sector G. The corridor seemed to curve upwards forever, lined with doors and illuminated by a harsh, blue-white light. Alien beings of every shape moved around them. A group of short, chittering creatures with too many legs scurried past, their shells clicking on the floor. A tall, willowy being covered in what looked like gray moss moved with slow, deliberate steps. Everywhere was the press of bodies. Personal space, it seemed, was a forgotten concept on Megalith 7. Following the directions on their rental agreement, they took a lift down 3 levels. The air grew warmer, the lighting dimmer. Their new home was at the end of a narrow side corridor. The door panel recognized their biometrics with a reluctant beep and slid open. The apartment was a single room, a vertical box. The main living space was just big enough for a small fold-down table and 2 chairs. A kitchen unit was set into one wall, and a partitioned area held a compact hygiene pod. A ladder led to a sleeping platform suspended near the ceiling. A single, small viewport showed a dizzying view of the exterior hive of the outpost, with ships and pods flitting past like insects. "It's efficient," Jinho said, putting down his bag. Sumi walked to the center of the room and took a slow, deep breath. Her shoulders slumped slightly. "It smells like disinfectant and sadness." Jinho moved to the life support panel on the wall. This was his domain. As an environmental systems engineer, his first task was always to make their space breathable, to carve out a tiny piece of Earth in the alien vastness. He began recalibrating the air mix, adjusting the humidity, tuning the background white noise to something softer, like distant rain. While he worked, Sumi opened her case. She carefully took out a small transparent container. Inside was a patch of green moss from Earth, a piece of home. She placed it on the small shelf under the viewport, where the light from a passing transport's engine flickered across it. Her work as a botanical geneticist often involved majestic, engineered plants, but this simple moss was her anchor. A sharp tapping came from the shared wall. They both froze. It was followed by a low, throaty sound of disapproval. Sumi's eyes met Jinho's, the neighbor. Their rental application had, of course, included the legally required disclosure. Occupant 2, Sumi registered Homo sapiens lichen. Monthly biological cycle may involve increased auditory activity and metabolic shift. Secure containment protocol available upon request. They had heard the silence from the housing office after that was sent. Then the eventual terse approval for Sector G, the most crowded, least desirable area. The place where unusual tenants were out of sight. Jinho finished his adjustments. The air in the room subtly changed, becoming cleaner, fresher, with a hint of pine from the scent dispenser he'd tweaked. He walked over to Sumi and put his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Together, they looked out at the chaotic, buzzing view. "We'll make it work," he whispered. "We always do." She leaned back into him. "I know. It's just so loud. And everyone is so close. It's hard to think. Tomorrow I start my job. You'll meet the botany team. We'll find a routine." His words were a familiar mantra. They ate a simple meal from their travel packs in silence, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the outpost settling into its night cycle. The tapping from next door did not come again, but the feeling of being watched, judged, and merely tolerated hung in the air thicker than the strange smells. Exhausted, they climbed the ladder to the sleeping platform. It was a tight fit, but they were used to that. Sumi curled on her side, and Jinho curled around her, his body a shield against the unfamiliar world outside their thin walls. He felt the tension in her muscles, the alertness that never fully left her, especially in the week before her change. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I love you too," she murmured. They lay in the dark, holding on to each other in their small pods suspended in the immensity of the crowded alien outpost. The sounds of Megalith 7 were a lullaby of chaos. Slowly, exhaustion won over anxiety, and they slept, dreaming not of the future, but simply of a quiet, open field under a blue sky, a memory from a planet, and a life that felt very far away. Jinho woke up because he felt the light. It wasn't the light on his eyelids. It was the light in the ceiling panel. He could feel its energy like a tiny, warm pressure on his skin. He could feel the quiet hum of its power line, a thin thread of vibration running back into the wall. He opened his eyes, confused. The room was dark, the main lights still off. Only the soft blue standby glow from the kitchen unit illuminated things. Sumi was still asleep beside him. Breathing slowly, he sat up carefully, trying to understand the strange feeling. It was like his whole body was listening, not with his ears but with his bones. He swung his legs off the sleeping platform and his bare feet touched the cold floor. The shock was not just temperature. He felt the floor. He felt the layers of it. The polished surface under his toes, the metal subfloor beneath that, and below that, the empty utility space running through the whole sector. He could feel the faint tremor of a large recycling processor 3 levels down. It was a steady, rhythmic thump-thump-thump in the soles of his feet, a heartbeat for the outpost. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. He stood up and put a hand on the wall. It was worse and better. Information flowed into him, a quiet river of sensation. He felt the stress in the wall structure, a hairline fracture near the corner where their unit met the neighbors, a tiny weakness from old pressure changes. He felt the flow of air inside the wall vents, knowing exactly where a small filter was 90% clogged. He could trace the entire electrical path for their apartment, seeing it in his mind like a bright, clear diagram. Panic started to rise in his chest. Was he sick? Was it some kind of space sickness, a reaction to the alien air mix? He stumbled to the small hygiene pod and splashed water on his face. He looked at his reflection. Same tired eyes, same face. But nothing felt the same. He needed to focus on something normal. He needed to do his morning check of the environmental systems. That was his job. That was real. He went to the main wall panel and placed his fingers on the status screen. He didn't even need to turn it on. The moment he touched the casing, he knew. He knew the oxygen mix in their room was perfect, a little bubble of Earth. He knew the carbon dioxide scrubber in the corridor outside was working at only 80% efficiency. He knew that in apartment G78, for doors down, a family of the insect-like Creve had a faulty heater that was slowly leaking harmless but smelly gas. He just knew. He pulled his hand back as if burned. His heart was pounding. What was happening to him? A soft sound came from above. A gasp. Sumi was waking up. Jinho climbed the ladder quickly. "Sumi? Are you okay?" She was sitting up, her eyes wide and staring into the dark corner of their room. She didn't look at him. Her nostrils flared. She was taking in short, sharp breaths. "Sumi?" he asked again, his own strange feelings forgotten in his worry for her. "It's so loud," she whispered, her voice strained. "The noise? I can turn the sound dampeners up," he said, starting to move. "Not noise," she said, shaking her head. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were full of tears and wonder. "Smells, feelings, everything is clear." She pointed a shaky finger at the shared wall with their neighbor. "He's awake, the tourist man. He's annoyed and curious. And he thinks our air mix is too floral. It's weak, he thinks. It's a smell of weakness. Jinho stared. You can't know that. I can smell it, Sumi said, her voice stronger but full of disbelief. I can smell his feather dust irritation. I can smell the Creve family down the hall. They are anxious. They owe someone something. I can smell the moss in the corner of the Mycelids' apartment across the way. It's happy. It has just the right dampness. She swung her legs over the side of the platform. And the plants. Jinho, I can feel the plants. She climbed down and went straight to her small container of earth moss. She didn't touch it. She just held her hand over it. It's lonely. It's reaching for other green things. It's thirsty, but not for water in the tray. The air is too dry for it. Deep down. She turned to him, her face pale. What is this? Is this my change? It's not time. It doesn't feel like that. It feels bigger. Jinho came down and stood before her. He took her hands. They were cold. He told her. He told her about feeling the floor, the walls, the clogged filter, the Creve's heater. He spoke in a low, rushed voice. They stood in the middle of their small, dark apartment, holding hands, surrounded by the sleeping outpost. But they were not in the dark. They were flooded with information. Jinho felt the slow, breathing rhythm of the life support in their sector like a giant lung. Sumi smelled the emotional weather of their entire corridor. Pockets of sleep, worry, contentment, and hunger. They were not the same people who went to sleep. The crowded, indifferent outpost had done something to them. It had changed them in their sleep. Nobody can know, Sumi said first, her voice firm with sudden, protective fear. If they thought I was a problem before, if they find out about this. Jinho nodded, his engineer's mind already moving to containment. We hide it. We be careful. We figure this out ourselves. They got ready for their first day of work in silence, moving around each other carefully, as if they might break. Jinho dressed, intensely aware of the fabric of his clothes, the flow of air from the vent above him. Sumi brushed her hair, each strand feeling distinct and alive under her fingers. They left their apartment together. The corridor was busy with morning traffic. As they stepped out, a wave of new sensation hit them. For Jinho, it was a storm of structural groans, energy flows, and system statuses. For Sumi, it was a hurricane of smells, emotions, and the silent songs of 100 different life forms. They looked at each other. In that look was a shared understanding. The world was no longer simple. It was an ocean of data, and they were suddenly drowning in it. And they had to pretend they couldn't even swim. The first day of work was a test. Every step was an effort in pretending. Jinho walked into the environmental control hub for Sector G. The room was a forest of screens, blinking lights, and low chatter from the other technicians. The moment he entered, it was like walking into a physical wall of sound only he could hear. He felt the hum of every console, the flicker of every light, the hidden stress point in the support column by the door. It was overwhelming. His supervisor, a tired-looking man named Mr. Bach, gave him a simple task. Check the airflow calibration for subsector G12. The readings have been jumping around. Normally, this would take an hour. He would have to pull up schematics, run diagnostics, maybe even put on a suit and check a physical valve. Jinho sat at his station and placed his hands on the interface. The answer came to him instantly. It wasn't a thought. It was a feeling. The problem was not in G12. It was in a junction 2 sectors over in F7. A filter was almost completely blocked, causing a back pressure that made the G12 sensors go crazy. He sat there, frozen. He couldn't say that. How could he know that? Problem. New guy. Mr. Bach asked, walking past. No. Just thinking. Jinho stammered. He forced his hands to move. He pretended to pull up files. He ran a standard, slow diagnostic on the G12 system, knowing it would show nothing wrong. After 20 minutes, he made a show of scratching his head. The diagnostics are clean here, sir. Maybe, could it be a pressure feedback from another sector? Like from F? Mr. Bach frowned. F sector? That's not on the same primary line. He looked skeptical. But he went to his own screen. He checked the master flow diagram. His frown deepened. Ha! The F7 junction is reading high resistance. How did you? Lucky guess, I suppose. Good instinct. I'll have a F-sector team check it. Jinho nodded, his heart pounding. He had passed the first test by telling a half-truth. He spent the rest of his shift moving slowly, deliberately. He fixed small issues before they were reported, but he always made it look like he had found the problem through careful, normal work. He noticed a failing pump by hearing a strange sound. He guessed a power relay was overheating because he smelled something funny. His new reputation began quietly, as the guy who was surprisingly lucky and very observant. Across the outpost, in the tiered hydroponic gardens, Sumi faced her own trial. The air was warm and wet, full of the smell of alien soil and growing things. To her new senses, it was a symphony of life, each plant singing a silent song of need, growth, or sickness. Her team leader, a friendly mycelid named Klen, showed her a row of drooping, silver-leafed ferns. These are a problem. They are not responding to nutrients. They are sad. We may lose them. Sumi knelt. She didn't need to touch the plant. A wave of information came to her. She could smell the chemical imbalance in the soil, a lack of a specific rare mineral. But more than that, she could feel the plant's slow, fading pulse. It was lonely. These ferns were communal. They needed to sense the root tips of others nearby, but they had been spaced too far apart in this new tray. She stood up, trying to look like she was thinking. The soil analysis, she said carefully. Has it been checked for trace selenium? Klen's mossy head tilted. Selenium? It is not on our standard list for this species. It was in a paper I read on Earth-based extrapolation. Sumi lied smoothly. A guess. Also, maybe if we move them closer together, they look isolated. Klen made a soft, pondering sound. Your guesses are interesting. We will try. They adjusted the nutrient mix and moved the ferns into a tighter cluster. Within an hour, the leaves had lost their gray tinge. By the end of the shift, they were perking up. Klen was impressed. You have a green thumb, as humans say. A very good nose for problems. Sumi smiled weakly. She had a nose for everything. She could smell Klen's honest pride. She could also smell the sharp, metallic scent of jealousy from another human botanist across the room. She could smell the peaceful, sleepy contentment of the giant spore cap growing in the corner. It was exhausting. She had to constantly filter it out, to pretend she only saw what was in front of her eyes. That evening, they met back in their tiny apartment. They were both drained. They sat at the small fold-down table, not eating. It's like wearing a suit that's too tight all the time, Jinho said quietly, rubbing his temples. I have to move slow, think slow on purpose. I have to pretend I'm deaf and blind, Sumi whispered. The tourist man next door. He filed a complaint today about unusual biological activity from our unit last night. He means me, my sleep cycles. He doesn't even know about this. The fear was back, colder now. Their secret was a fragile bubble. Jinho's lucky guesses and Sumi's green thumb were drawing a quiet kind of attention. The wrong kind. We have to be more careful, Jinho said. But being careful was harder the next day and the day after. Jinho prevented a minor power surge in his sector by noticing a fluctuating readout no one else saw. Sumi revived a dying light vine by intuitively sensing it needed a specific pattern of shadow, not more light. Small miracles, quiet whispers. They were building a new life on a foundation of secrets. Every night, they held each other in their sleeping platform, listening not just to the outpost, but to the new, impossible hum inside their own bodies. They were waiting for something to break. They just didn't know if it would be the outpost or their own careful act. It started with the lights. The harsh, blue-white lights lining the corridors of Sector G flickered once, twice, and then died. A deep, shuddering groan ran through the floor, a sound felt more than heard. Then the emergency red lights snapped on, painting everything in a bloody, pulsing glow. Jinho was in the environmental control hub. Every screen went dark. A second later, the backup power kicked in. Half the screens lit up, flashing with urgent red warnings. But for Jinho, the information didn't come from the screens. It hit him like a physical blow. A wave of wrongness washed over him. It was a screaming chorus of pain from the outpost itself. He felt the central power reactor, far away in the core, shudder and spike. He felt the surge race through the grid like a wild animal, burning out relays and overloading circuits. Most of all, he felt the life support systems, his systems, stutter and fail. He could see it in his mind. Oxygen mixers shutting down, carbon scrubbers going offline, toxic byproducts from alien atmospheres starting to bleed into the wrong corridors. Alarms screamed. Mr. Bach was yelling orders, his voice thin against the noise. Cascade failure. Primary life support is down in sectors G, H, and F. We have containment breaches. Everyone, lock to your stations. But Jinho wasn't at his station. He was on his knees, hands clamped over his ears. It did nothing. The feedback wasn't in his ears. It was in his bones. He could feel the fracture spreading, system after system falling like dominoes. He saw the weak points, the valves about to burst, the filters melting. The data was a fire in his brain. Across the outpost, Sumi was in the main mess hall. She had been getting a midday meal. One moment it was the usual crowded noise. The next, the lights died and the red alarms flashed. Panic erupted instantly. A tourist shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure fear. A group of Creeves scrambled over tables, clicking madly. The mycelids huddled together, vibrating with distress. The air changed, too. The careful, balanced mix was gone. A foul, acidic smell began to seep from the vents. A gas harmless to some, but poisonous to others. For Sumi, the sensory attack was different, but just as violent. The wall of alien fear hit her first. It wasn't just noise, it was a taste, a smell, a physical pressure. The tourist's terror was like burned feathers. The Creeves' panic was a sharp, sour chemical. The mycelid's distress was a damp, rotten smell. It was too much. She staggered back against a wall, gasping for clean air that wasn't there. Then she felt the biological distress. The plants in the decorative wall planters were wilting, their life songs turning to sharp cries as the air turned bad. The moss in her pocket, her piece of earth, screamed a silent scream of suffocation. Contamination in the air, someone shouted. Seal the doors. But the doors weren't sealing. The power surge had damaged the controls. People were pushing, shoving towards the exits. Sumi saw a cluster of 3 young mycelids, their slow movement making them easy to trample. They were blind, sensing their way by touch and spore signature. Now, with the panic and the bad air, they were lost, huddled in a corner, emitting a smell of pure, childlike confusion and fear. Her own fear vanished, washed away by a stronger instinct. She pushed off from the wall. She didn't hear the panic anymore. She followed the scent of their fear. She knelt before them, blocking the shoving crowd with her body. It's all right, she said, her voice surprisingly calm. She didn't know if they understood words, but she poured out a feeling instead. She focused on them, on their unique, mossy, young scent. She pushed back at the storm of panic around her and projected calm, safety, and a clear, clean path. She took the hand of the tallest one. Follow me, she whispered, and she smelled the safe route. The corridor with the least panic and the slightly better AI are at the same moment. In the control hub, Jinho couldn't take it anymore. The screaming systems in his head were going to break him. He saw on a flickering screen that the mess hall doors were stuck. People would die in there, crushed or poisoned. He lurched to his feet. He ignored Mr. Bach's shouts. He went to the main engineering console for the sector. He didn't look at the controls. He closed his eyes and placed his palms flat on the cool metal surface. The storm of data focused. He blocked out the failing reactors, the burning relays. He searched for one thing, the mess hall safety doors. He found them in the mental schematic. The surge had fried their primary and secondary control boards. But there was a tertiary manual hydraulic override. It was buried, forgotten. He could feel its location, like a dim, cold spot in the wall of fire. He opened his eyes. The technician at the console was frantically tapping, getting no response. Jinho's voice was rough, loud, cutting through the chaos. Manual override. Sector G9, Junction Beta. There's a physical hydraulic release behind the wall panel. Use tool code 7. Now. The technician stared at him. What? How do you? Now. Jinho roared, his eyes wild with the pain of holding the failing grid in his mind. The technician jumped, grabbing the tool. He relayed the instruction to a team in the corridor. Jinho turned back, eyes closed again. The life support for the mess hall. It's on a secondary loop. Valve G12 is shut. Thinks there's a breach. There isn't. Override it. Code 477 Echo. Mr. Bach was just staring at him. Jinho was reciting technical data that wasn't on any visible screen. But the commands were specific, confident. With no other options, Bach started shouting the codes into his headset in the mess hall. The doors suddenly shuttered and began to grind shut, sealing the contaminated area. A moment later, a gust of cleaner air hissed from the functional vents in the ceiling. The panic slowed, just a little. Sumi, leading the young mycelids to safety, heard the doors seal and felt the air change. She looked up through the crowd. Across the room, on a wall screen showing the control hub feed, she saw her husband. He was pale, sweating, his hands on a console, his eyes closed, shouting impossible instructions, and she knew their secret was over. Silence had returned to Megalith 7, but it was the quiet of a deep and painful bruise. Emergency lights still glowed. The air smelled of burnt circuits and fear. Jinho and Sumi sat side by side on a bench in a sterile security office. They had not been placed in cells, but the door was locked. Jinho's head was bowed. He felt hollowed out. The screaming of the systems was gone, but the echo of it was a dull ache behind his eyes. Sumi held his hand tightly. Her own senses were dialed down to a whisper, a defense against the lingering stress and suspicion that clung to the walls of the room. They didn't speak. They had already said everything in the frantic, grasping moments after the crisis, as they were escorted away.
I'm sorry.
I had to. What will they do to us? The door slid open with a soft hiss. The being that entered was tall and slender, with smooth, gray-green skin and the slow, deliberate movements of the Zython. This was Director Kval. They had seen his image on Outpost bulletins. In person, he seemed older, and his large, dark eyes held a deep weariness. He did not sit. He stood before them, his long hands folded. The cascade has been contained, Director Kval said, his voice a low, rustling sound. Damage is significant, but fatalities were avoided. This is largely due to two highly unusual interventions. He looked at Jinho, then at Sumi. My engineers are confused. My botanists are amazed. My security chief is suspicious. Jinho felt Sumi's grip tighten. He prepared for the worst. Detainment, experimentation, deportation to some corporate lab. I have reviewed all the data, Kval continued. The camera footage from the mess hall, the command logs from the control hub, the reports of your pre-crisis work, the lucky guesses, the green thumb. He paused, letting the words hang. You hid something, something new. We don't understand it ourselves, Jinho said, his voice rough. That is the only reason you are here, and not in a holding cell, Kval replied evenly. Confusion I understand. Malice is different. What I saw was not malice. It was instinct, a need to fix, to protect. He took a slow step closer. The outpost is damaged, but one wound is beyond our standard means. It is the central arboretum. Sumi looked up. She knew of it. A vast, sealed garden at the heart of Megalith 7, home to thousands of delicate, interconnected alien species. It was more than a park. It was a climate stabilizer and, some said, a psychic bomb for the crowded station. The power surge did not just break machines, Kval said. It sent a shock through the Arboretum's core bioregulator. The system is symbiotic. It is alive and machine as one. Now it is dying. The plants fade. The balance fails. Our engineers cannot fix the machine without killing the life. Our biologists cannot save the life without the machine. Both are failing together. He looked at them, his weary eyes sharpening. But you are not one thing. You are two, but you seem to work as one system. He gestured to Jinho, understands connections, structures, flows. He gestured to Sumi, understands life, growth, and feeling. Is this correct? They looked at each other. It was the truth. They had never said it out loud. The Arboretum is the heart of this outpost. Without it, the air will grow stale in a different way. Tensions will rise. This place will become a tomb of anger. Director Kval leaned forward slightly. I am making you an offer. One chance. Jinho's throat was dry. What offer? You go into the Arboretum. You use whatever this new ability is. You try to heal it. If you succeed, you will have a permanent home here on Megalith 7. Protected status. No more crowded Sector G. No more filed complaints from your neighbor. Your secret will be safe with me. You will be valued, not feared. And if we fail? Sumi asked quietly. Director Kval straightened. Then the Arboretum dies, and you will be relocated to a place where your condition can be studied by those less understanding than I am. It is a risk. For all of us. The silence in the room was absolute. Jinho could feel the steady, sad vibration of the damaged outpost around them. Sumi could smell the director's scent. Not deception, but a desperate, dry hope. Like ancient paper, it was a leap into the unknown. To show everything. To trust this alien with their truth. But the other option was to be taken apart, piece by piece, to have their strange new bond examined and broken. Jinho looked at Sumi. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also the determination. The same look she had when they boarded the transport to come here. The look of someone ready to fight for a home. We don't know how to control it, Jinho said, turning back to Kval. Then you will learn. Now, in the heart of the dying garden, the director said. Do we have an agreement? Sumi spoke first. Her voice was clear. We want to help. Jinho nodded. We agree. Director Kval gave a slow, grave nod of his own. Good. Come with me. He turned and led them out of the security office, not toward a cell, but deeper into the wounded outpost, toward its failing heart. They walked side by side, no longer hiding, stepping into a future that was entirely unknown. The door to the central arboretum was massive, made of aged wood and reinforced glass. It hissed open, and the smell that rushed out made Sumi gasp. It was not the smell of life, but the smell of life leaving. It was the scent of wilting petals, souring sap, and damp, dying roots. Underneath it was the sharp, metallic odor of broken machinery. The space inside was huge, a vast dome under a simulated sky that now flickered weakly. Tall, strange trees with silver bark reached up, but their leaves were falling like slow rain. Vines that once glowed with soft light now hung dark and limp. The air was too still and too quiet. The normal hum of insects and rustle of leaves was gone. Director Kval stopped at the entrance. The core is in the center. The bioregulator is there. We have done all we can from the outside. The rest is up to you. He gave them a final, unreadable look and stepped back. The great door slid shut, sealing them in the tomb of the garden. For a moment, they just stood, overwhelmed. The weight of the dying world pressed on them. Jinho felt it as a crushing pressure of silence where there should be flows of energy and water. Sumi felt it as a chorus of faint, pained whispers, each plant crying out a different song of distress. We have to start, Sumi whispered, her voice swallowed by the large space. They walked to the center, their footsteps the only sound. There they found the core. It was not a machine or a plant, but both. A great, crystal-like structure rose from the ground, pulsing with a faint, sickly green light at its base. Woven into it and through it were thick, root-like cables of living wood and veins of glowing moss. Half of the crystal was dark. The roots around that side were black and shriveled. Jinho approached the crystal. He didn't need to touch it to feel the wrongness. The energy flow was blocked, shattered. The pathways were like broken streets in a city he could see with his eyes closed. "It's like a circuit with a dead short," he murmured. "But half the circuit is alive." Sumi knelt by the blackened roots. She placed her hands near them, not touching. She closed her eyes. A wave of profound sadness hit her. They're in pain. They're cut off. The machine part isn't feeding them the right signals anymore. The light, the rhythm, it's all wrong. They're starving and confused. "I can see the breaks in the energy lines," Jinho said, pointing to a spot on the crystal only he could see. "But if I try to reroute the power, it might shock the living side. Could kill it. And if I just try to soothe the plants, to make them grow," Sumi said, "they'll push against the broken machine parts. They could tear themselves apart." They looked at each other across the dying core. The problem was impossible. Machine and life, each needing help, but each hurt by the cure for the other. "We have to do it together," Jinho said. "Not one after the other." At the same time, Sumi nodded. She understood. It was what they had been doing in small ways without realizing it. He was the map. She was the guide. Jinho sat on one side of the core. He placed his palms flat on the cool, dead part of the crystal. He took a deep breath and let his mind go into the system. He didn't fight the flood of information this time. He embraced it. He saw the shattered lines of light, the blocked paths. He found the first break, a major junction where energy was sparking uselessly into nothing. "Here," he said, his voice distant. "The first break. It's flooding the root node below it with raw power. It's burning it from the inside." Sumi moved to where he pointed. She placed her hands on the shriveled root. She felt its agony, its scorched and frayed life force. She felt what it needed. Not less energy, but different energy. Softer, slower. A gentle pulse, not a constant shock. "I need to change the flow," Jinho said. "But the new path runs right through this root." "Then change it," Sumi said, her eyes closed in concentration. "But make it a wave, not a flood. I will prepare the root. I will show it the wave is coming. I will help it bend, not break." It was a leap of faith. Jinho, in his mind, began to reroute the power. He created a new channel, visualizing it clearly. As he did, he focused on making the energy pulse in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Sumi poured her attention into the root. She didn't send it raw strength. She sent it an understanding. Pattern. She whispered to its cells, not with words, but with feeling. "A wave is coming. It is safe. It is life. Rise to meet it. Bend with it." Jinho opened the channel that a pulse of soft, green light traveled down the new path Jinho had made. It reached the root. The root did not shatter. It trembled. Under Sumi's hands, the blackness receded, just a little. A faint, gold light flickered within the woody flesh. The pulse of energy passed through it and continued, feeding the next part of the system. A single, tiny leaf on a nearby vine shivered and turned from gray to blue. They both let out a breath they didn't know they were holding. It had worked. "Next one," Jinho said, a new determination in his voice. They moved like that for what felt like hours. Jinho found the breaks, the blockages, the starving junctions. He designed the fixes. Sumi spoke to the life, calming it, preparing it, teaching it to accept the repair. He was the architect. She was the translator. They were two halves of one mind. Slowly, light returned to the dark half of the crystal. The pulses became stronger, more regular. The blackened roots drank in the new, gentle energy and began to plump up, the color returning to a healthy brown. The fallen leaves stopped falling. The air itself began to change, the smell of death replaced by the scent of damp soil and new growth. The final piece was the main heart node. It was the biggest break and the most delicate root. They were both exhausted, sweat on their brows. They placed their hands together on the last point of failure. "Ready?" Jinho whispered. Sumi nodded. He rerouted the final, primary flow. She wrapped the fragile root in a feeling of pure, safe belonging. Light exploded through the core. Not a harsh light, but a warm, golden glow that filled the entire arboretum. The simulated sky above stopped flickering and became a deep, peaceful twilight. Every plant seemed to straighten up at once. A chorus of invisible insects began to hum. The vines glowed softly. The air was suddenly vibrantly alive. Jinho and Sumi slumped back from the core, their hands falling apart. They were tired to their bones, but they were smiling. In the center of the garden, the crystal now pulsed with a steady, healthy rhythm, perfectly in tune with the living wood and glowing moss that embraced it. The garden was not just fixed, it was whole, and so, for the first time, they slept for almost a full day after healing the arboretum. When they woke in their small apartment in Sector G, the silence was different. It wasn't the quiet of fear or hiding. It was the quiet of deep peace. Jinho could still feel the outpost around him, but it was no longer a screaming pressure. It was like hearing the steady, calm breathing of a giant creature. Sumi could still sense the life around her, but the emotions were no longer a storm. They were a gentle hum, a background song that a message was waiting on their screen. It was from Director Kval. It was simple. Please report to my office at your convenience. This time there were no guards. They walked through the corridors and people looked at them differently. It wasn't stares of suspicion or pity. It was looks of curiosity and something else. Respect. Word had spread, in the way it does on a crowded outpost, about the humans who had saved the heart of the garden. The director's office was spacious, with a real window looking out at the stars. Kval was waiting for them. The arboretum is thriving, he said without greeting. Better than it has in decades. The technicians are confused and happy. The biologists are weeping with joy. They call it a miracle. He looked at them. I call it a new form of understanding. One we need. He gestured for them to sit. A home is not just a place you are not thrown out of. It is a place where you belong, where you are needed. He slid 2 data slates across the desk. These are offers, new positions, created for you. Jinho picked his up. The title read, Chief Systems Synergist. The duties described were not about fixing broken filters. They were about listening to the outpost, feeling its health, and guiding long-term care. He would have a team, but his main tool would be his unique sense. Sumi's slate read, Head of Biospheric Harmony. Her role was to tend to all the living systems of Megalith 7, from the great gardens to the air-scrubbing algae, to sense their needs and their balance. Your new residence is here, Kval said, tapping the screen. Image appeared. It was an apartment, not in the crowded vertical stacks of Sector G, but on the inner ring, with a wide window looking directly into the lush, green canopy of the central arboretum. There was space. There was light. The terms are as agreed.